Hey guys and girls, Bored now back with you. On this video I will be talking about the first episode of the fourth season of The Handmaid's Tale. It is called Pigs, and I will be going into spoilers from the start of this review. So the long awaited return of The Handmaid's Tale, and the basic setup and the beats of this episode are that, having made the decision to stay in Gilead to rescue the commander's son, that as in the Bradley, or daughter, sorry, as in the Bradley Whitford's daughter, and sacrifice herself so that the 86 babies could basically escape Gilead and, you know, return to Canada, a safer place in Canada. Then June, at the start of this episode, has internal injuries from the fallout from that, and her and the other refugees head to a farm which is seen as like a safe haven for them to recuperate. And so a lot of the episode is set on the farm and the drama that comes from that, including the mistress of the farm, Miss Keys, who turns out is a very young girl. She must be like 12 or 13 at the most. And we find out some of her tortured past as like a handmaid herself, but that she's wanting to lead the rebellion or be a part of the rebellion, and that she wants revenge, because we find out in this episode that she not only was raped by her master, but then she was also passed around to other men. There were other men who were brought in, and I'm assuming like paid for it, and yeah, raped her. So she was raped by various men. So another sort of sinister, disturbing layer with that stuff. And meanwhile, in other sort of plots, the as a result of these 86 children being returned to Canada, the authorities in Gilead are preparing an invasion of Canada. They're preparing to go to Canada to try and get the children back. And we also see that the commander, the Bradley, I forget his name actually, but the Bradley Whitford character who has been imprisoned, he is actually reassigned in this episode. So there's a little bit with him, a little bit with Aunt Lydia, who's been let off. Basically, he's been found not guilty of her responsibility when it comes to the rebellion. But she very much puts the spotlight on June. She says to the board, says to the court that this all came about because of the other handmaids being misled, them being manipulated by June. And so you should go and find June, you should arrest her. And we see some of the reactions, like from the Waterfords, when that, because obviously they're currently under arrest in Canada as a result of their actions, and they find out about what's happening. And it's the one thing that unites the Waterfords, actually, because at the moment their marriage isn't going too well, but they kind of unite on seeing like the action of the rebellion, and seeing it as a bad thing, and almost trying to justify it, saying, well, this will just lead to like anarchy and like, you know, like a massacre sort of thing. And again, sort of frowning on June and saying, just praying for her. But anyway, my overall thoughts on this first episode is that it's a mixed bag. There was some stuff that I was liking, and some stuff where I could see some promising, certainly with the character beats, and that it was setting some strong stuff up, but also stuff which maybe felt a bit too repetitive, and some stuff which was a little bit sloppy. I'll get more into it, but I didn't really care about the Miss Keys character. I don't think they did enough to make me care about her particularly, despite obviously the terrible things that had happened with her. And there's this problem with her where she maybe just feels like a one episode character. I mean, who knows? They might bring her back, but it feels like the sort of character that serves its purpose for this one episode, and part of that purpose is to almost like refocus June, get her back in the game, get her sort of focus back on the mission in hand, and almost give her a new edge once again, because June at the start of this episode goes from being in a very vulnerable sort of beaten down place to being almost like the old June again in a way, being very, very strong and determined. But because it feels like this sort of one episode purpose type thing, then I think the stuff with Mrs. Keys, or Miss Keys, Esther, I think her name is, does feel a little bit weak and a little bit like it's kind of just there as setup stuff and to move the plot along. And that's the thing about this episode, is I can't really be that down on it just because it feels like a setup episode, and it's setting up a lot of the bigger stuff for the season, like obviously the authorities in Gilead, they're going to invade Canada, and setting up that stuff, and then setting up obviously again the continued rebellion of June and the handmaids. But I would say the stuff on the farm was probably the weakest stuff of the episode. I think in general in this episode with June, there were some repetitive beats. There were a bit, oh, we're doing the sort of torture stuff again with her. We're going to make her suffer as much as possible. And it just felt like they were sort of draining that well a bit too much. Like they could have toned that down. I think, interestingly, this episode has sort of a body horror type feel, which they link to some of the stuff on the farm, because the pigs of the title, it almost has a double meaning, because it's kind of talking about the metaphorical like scumbag pigs, but also literally there's a pig on the farm which Janine calls Mr. Darcy, because of course she does, she's Janine, which is a nice character beat for Janine, I think. But then you get this really gruesome sort of gross out scene where the pig is killed, and they're forced to eat it basically by Miss Keys, and she forces it down Janine's throat. And it's that scene which leads to June confronting her, and that's when June becomes sort of like a mother figure to her, because Miss Keys then opens up about the past, and this is a really powerful scene, which is very disturbing. So I think it does sort of hit the right tone in that scene. It's just the fact that because Miss Keys is this one episode, this one shot character, or feels like it, and just feels like we're setting up where June's going to be at the end of the episode, because June does become like this mother figure, and it's almost like she regains the power by the end of the episode. But yeah, I just didn't quite buy into Miss Keys as a character. I thought at times she came off as a bit over the top, a little bit annoying. Obviously, when you find out what she's been through, she's a bit more sympathetic. But yeah, she wasn't the best character. I don't know if she's a character we're going to see more of or not. But yeah, because it did feel like she was mainly there to set up June's motivations and stuff, then it did make her feel a bit sort of weak. And just some of the stuff with June in the episode to do with her body, and like when they're at one point, they like the other refugees, they sort of prod her with like a hot iron to sort of like fix her wounds, and just stuff like that. Although it's quite well done, I think that just feels a bit like, yeah, you're sort of turning up the torture aspect for the sake of it, really, and sort of dragging your heels a little bit. And there's some good stuff, but I thought the farm stuff was maybe the weakest. Um, and the ending's kind of a bit odd, and where June, basically her attitude has changed because the Miss Keys character is all about getting revenge on those who raped her, so the others as well. And at one point, you see the change in June starting to happen because she meets like Miss Keys like commander, and she has a knife and is almost determined to like kill him, but then they're like interrupted. But there's sort of this empowering thing going on with the well, let's say former handmaids, because they start to find their feet, and at one point, one of them says to June, "Let's enjoy our freedom because this might be as good as it gets." And there's this odd sort of scene in the barn where they're like dancing and having a good time, and it actually has a surreal feel. So I wasn't quite sure if it was meant to be in June's head, but it's quite an interesting scene because it's one you can read either way. It's one because June's reaction was hard to gauge. I wasn't quite sure if she was pleased for them or not, or maybe just a bit worried at where they were sort of going as like people, as characters, or it could be then, yeah, it's a positive scene in like June seeing that there could be like freedom in their future, that kind of thing. It was quite hard to sort of read. It was quite a surreal sort of scene. But yeah, by the end of the episode, because Miss Keys has captured this guy Johnny, who's one of the ones who was like brought in and paid to basically rape her, and ultimately they get revenge on Johnny, that they kill him, but it's in the end it's Miss Keys. But notably, it's June who takes control when the other handmaids are going after um, him. And again, I think some of that stuff you can say is a little bit rushed. In maybe that they're sort of acting out of character, but I guess you can sort of understand and justify it based on what they've been through and the fact that this is basically from their point of view like an antagonist to all that. But June takes control and ultimately has him in the barn and is almost putting him on trial in a way, but he's sort of tied up and gagged, and then she puts the knife in Miss Key's hand, and Miss Keys like stabs him, and June sort of walks off, and for added effect, we just hear like his screams. But it sort of ends with this odd sort of scene with June laying on the bed, and Miss Keys comes in and like lays next to her, and we just see that she's kind of become a mother figure. But I think one of the things it's trying to do is it's trying to question, is this quite right? Is it right to act in this way from the handmaids? Is it right to kill someone no matter what they've done to you? But obviously part of the point of the rebellion and the whole turning the tables is the fact then in this sort of universe, in this world, I guess that maybe what justice looks like, that's maybe as good as it's going to get, and that maybe you don't have any choice because you're let down by the law. The law doesn't always serve justice, especially not in Gilead. So sometimes you do have to take things in your own hand. Now, clearly, I think it's meant to be murky because the way they all gang up on him, the way he's like tied up and stuff, and I think you could still say ultimately it's wrong to just like brutally kill someone like that. But I think also there's meant to be a bit of uncertainty over if it is actually him. I mean, Miss Keys says he's one of them. I guess there's no reason to believe he's not, but just the tone of the scene made me thought that there was meant to be some uncertainty there. So yeah, the stuff on the farm I was a bit mixed on. I think there is good stuff in the episode. I think there's some good character stuff in the episode. And obviously some of the stuff that it's building up to. I enjoyed the scenes with like the Bradley Whitford character, for example. I sort of like the humour, like the subtle little humour that he brings to the show, to the series, and he's just a likable presence and quite a believable sort of character, and his reactions to things. And also he does this speech to Nick at one point where he basically warns him about the consequences of if there's an invasion into Canada. And also he makes this speech about how the next few years are crucial for our country. Now, I'm guessing because this probably was being filmed around about the US election, so I'm guessing that felt very, contemporary and current for that time because it obviously was a massive election, and because of who was president going into that election, it did feel like a crucial election. But so from that point of view, it maybe feels a bit on the nose, but it's a very good speech nonetheless, and it definitely fits for the politics of Gilead and of the Handmaid's Tale. So it works in the context of the show. It doesn't feel like out of step with the show. And I think Whitford, again, his acting skills, his delivery sort of gives it weight as well. He really makes it sound like an important thing. I also like when he puts to Nick, I mean, what do you want June's legacy to be ultimately? Almost like a mote into him. And then there's quite a funny little sort of commentary from him when he's getting a shave when they say, yeah, we've got a new assignment for you. So there's some pretty good character stuff with him, and the scene with the Waterfords was quite good as well. They're still like in custody basically, but they find out about what's happened with the children and with June. And yeah, so the character stuff is pretty good, and I think again a lot of this episode is set up, so we'll have to see where it goes, but. Yeah, very mixed first episode of season 4, I would say. So that's my thoughts. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. And I'll be back next week with a review of episode 2. But thanks for listening. Like and subscribe. Share me out on social media. You can also ding the bell on YouTube to get notifications. But thanks, guys. See you again soon. Goodbye.